Tonight, a notorious murder back in the national spotlight.
Just this week, a wildly controversial parole decision. Is a convicted killer now walking free? An all-new 2020 starts right now.
Pound for pound, one of the greatest true crime stories of all time.
This would turn out to be a notorious, surreal case.
A woman brutally murdered in cold blood.
Investigators at the time believed that Sherry Rasmussen was the victim of a burglary that had turned into her own murder.
As I walked in, there was blood.
She was literally clawing at the front door, trying to get out.
People were on edge during that era. And add to that, we were the serial killer capital of the world.
It's like being hit by a train, just like being hit by a train. I don't usually talk about that day or that time.
How soon was it after the murder that your father and your mother started to think that maybe this wasn't a robbery?
I assumed it was going to be burglars, male burglars.
And there was another piece of evidence that caught the attention of investigators. A bite mark on Sherry's forearm.
A suspect that the LAPD could never have fathomed.
If you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, you can't help but notice the stars on the sidewalk, the glitter in the pavement, and you think to yourself, wow, this is Tinseltown. But it doesn't take long until you realize that there are deep cracks in that pavement, exposing a criminal element you could never have anticipated. And the case of Sherry Rasmussen was a rude awakening for anyone living in La La Land.
President Reagan in Los Angeles.
Today, the torch entered the City of Angels
For AIDS Walkathon in Hollywood.
It was 1986. A beautiful young nurse, only 3 months into her marriage, is brutally murdered in her own townhome.
As a television journalist, I've been reporting on true crime stories for decades on numerous outlets. And you think you're never going to be shocked anymore ever again? Well, this proved all that very wrong.
It was a huge story. It had all the elements, sex and betrayal and lies. It just gripped the nation.
It's definitely, pound for pound, one of the greatest true crime stories of all time.
Everything we always heard or was told about Aunt Sherry was about what a great person she was.
Tell me about your sister.
She was the middle sister, and she was a clown. If everything got too serious, she would make everybody laugh.
She had a very unique little giggle.
Uncle John and Aunt Sherry are spending Christmas with Rachel on her first Christmas.
Sherry was all about family. Sherry was our glue. She kept us all together.
From a young age, Sherry, the middle child with that infectious giggle, seemed mature beyond her years, according to her sisters, Connie and Teresa. She leapfrogged from the 8th grade into high school, and Sherry graduated early at the age of just 16 and enrolled in nursing school.
She had certainly an interest in caring for other people.
By the time she was 21, Sherry was fearless and determined, and she moved from her hometown of Tucson, Arizona, to Los Angeles.
When she passed away, she was the director of critical care at the Glendale Adventist Hospital.
When I think of Sherry, I think of her kindness and her generosity.
Sherry's father, Nels, who was a dentist, had encouraged her to enroll in medical school to become a doctor, but she had other plans in mind.
Sherry always wanted to have a family and a husband and children.
In the spring of 1984, Sherry met a young engineer named John Rutten.
John Rutten was a tall, handsome, bright, athletic young man from San Diego, California.
Sherry was so tall, she often had difficulty finding guys who weren't intimidated by someone with her stature. And I know that John was just taken with her.
Sherry and John were very happy together. Sherry was always smiling and laughing and happy.
They settled in Sherry's condo in Van Nuys, and in November 1985, the couple got married.
It was a joyous celebration.
You could tell that they were in love.
She was just beginning her life. She'd met the man of her dreams, and she had a great job, and she was doing very well, and it was all coming together. 3 months later, and now it was all gone.
February 24, 1986. John had just returned home from work, and as he's walking up the steps into the townhome, the door is ajar. He walks into the townhome and sees his gorgeous bride dead in a pool of blood on the living room floor. He calls 911.
I was patrolling and I got a call to Balboa Boulevard.
Veteran LAPD patrol officer Rodney Forrest was one of the first cops to arrive at the scene.
The call was a death investigation. I thought that was particularly interesting. Why a murder in a kind of upscale part of town?
When Forrest and his partner got there, they were met with a grim warning from paramedics.
Somebody said, "You're not going to be prepared for what's in there." And I'm thinking, well, I've seen it all, so let's go see. Oh, wow. Well, this brings back memories. It's kind of an eerie feeling to be here after 30 plus, almost 40 years. As I walked in, I saw Sherry Rasmussen on the ground. She had been covered with a towel, and one of the paramedics raised the towel for me to see her face, and she had considerable trauma to her face, and there was blood. I thought after that, this is actually a murder.
At that point, Officer Forrest called the LAPD's Van Nuys division to notify the homicide unit, which took over the investigation.
It's a horribly violent crime. Bruises all over her body. The struggle ensued for quite some time.
My partner went upstairs, checked the upper floor for any suspects, and there were no suspects still around.
Investigators knew that something catastrophic had happened to Miss Rasmussen.
You think, given the ferocity of that fight, that somebody would have heard something.
You would think. It was a heck of a fight. I mean, Sherry fought for her life, literally.
That night, news of Sherry's murder reached her family in Tucson.
I'll probably never forget it, unfortunately. My dad called me to tell me that Sherry was dead. And I was like, that is, I certainly didn't believe it.
Beyond the pale.
Yeah. I was like, no, what are you talking about? That's not true. And he said, no, it is. And then I started screaming.
In the wake of Sherry's murder, her family struggled to understand what had happened. Could this be the result of the rampant violence that had plagued the city of Los Angeles in recent years?
A grim statistic from Los Angeles.
More murders in 1980 than ever before.
In parts of Los Angeles, there is a dangerous new tension.
Or had it been something far more personal?
This was a cold, calculated murder.
When investigators looked further into the crime scene, they uncovered a major clue that could change the course of the investigation.
This would turn out to be a notorious, surreal case with a twist no Hollywood writer could have come up with. For myself, as a reporter in Los Angeles, the 80s was the wild, wild west. Turn on the TV and what are you hearing about? Violent crime.
Crime running unchecked, the police seemingly unable to stop it. That frustration reached the breaking point in one neighborhood in Los Angeles.
Anyone that worked in the city of Los Angeles, they knew that they were going to have their hands filled.
There are more than 100 street gangs in Los Angeles.
It was out of control.
People were on edge during that era. And add to that, we were the serial killer capital of the world.
The Night Stalker killer.
Strangled, tortured bodies were found sprawled on hillsides.
By 1986, the homicide rate in Los Angeles had reached alarming levels. So when Sherry Rasmussen was murdered inside this apartment, it sent neighbors into a panic.
It was a dark period in our history. People were terrified to leave their homes.
Residents bought guns, learned martial arts.
People had bought up every single burglar alarm in the city, went to the LA County dog pound, and literally adopted every single dog for watchdogs.
The home invasion murder, the one similar to Sherry's, is going to cause a lot of fear in the community.
People were nervous. It was certainly a shock for me.
Alan Tarski lived across the corridor from Sherry, but he says he wasn't home at the time of the murder.
I had come back to work probably 5:45 in the evening, and it was shortly after that that the madness started. I do remember there was electronic stereo equipment right here that I saw when I came in, and that suggested to me that it was possibly a burglary, and a burglary interrupted. I put this together with the stereo equipment stacked over here, and it seemed to me that she could have struggled with the burglar, and she obviously lost that fight.
Sherry's newer model BMW was taken. Her purse was taken.
The Rasmussen crime scene had all the makings of something police call a hot prowl, a home invasion.
Investigators at the time very much believed that Sherry Rasmussen was the victim of a burglary that had turned into her own murder. Based on what investigators could see at the time, it appeared as though Sherry Rasmussen was working at her dining room table on the second level of her condominium when the intruder came in through the front door.
She had ligature marks on her wrists, indicating at some point someone had tied her up.
All over the place in these pictures, you see some of the implements that were used to hit Sherry.
Right.
The vase that was smashed over her head.
The shards had blood on them.
The assailant or assailants were grabbing at anything they could find to make sure this woman didn't breathe another breath.
Her fingernails were left broken at the front door.
Because she was literally clawing at the front door.
Trying to get out.
But before Sherry could escape, she was shot, police say, at point-blank range.
The bullets indicated that a .38 revolver had been used.
It was basically an execution.
Not a single neighbor heard a gunshot, and ballistics tests showed that it appeared the assailant had used that quilt over the barrel of the gun as a silencer.
And there was another piece of evidence that caught the attention of investigators. A bite mark on Sherry's forearm.
They took the sample in an abundance of caution because if there was blood there on that bite mark, it could be possible for blood typing analysis to be done.
I learned later about the bite mark that led into my curiosity of why there was a bite mark on her arm. I had no clue. It kind of reinforced what I was thinking when I initially got there. There was something more than I originally saw.
Former patrol officer Forrest, who wasn't part of the investigation, says to him, the crime scene didn't jibe with the burglary theory.
I thought to myself, this is a burglary? Burglars don't usually pick a place 5 condos from the street. They want to get away. They pick something next to the street. They don't want to be seen. It's just strange that they would pick this place.
Officer Forrest says he was also taken by the demeanor of Sherry's husband.
I noticed John Rutten. He was sitting at the table and he seemed to be sobbing. My reaction was his sobbing, his crying should have been more extreme, with his wife laying there on the floor dead. I guess people grieve in different ways.
Did you see John at any point directly after the murder?
We saw him at the Van Nuys police station, and I do remember that he didn't have any marks on him. That's the first thing you look at for any kind of domestic violence. So,
even though he was your brother-in-law, even though you liked him,
yes.
The first thing you did when you saw him is sort of give him a visual inspection, a
yes.
look over.
Yes.
Did you talk?
We weren't allowed to talk to him. They were keeping everybody separated.
Because the first suspect in murders like this typically is. Rutten wasn't permitted to speak with Sherry's family, but on the night of the murder, he sat down with investigators at the LAPD's Van Nuys station.
You didn't harm your wife, did you, John?
The question for investigators is, was he telling them everything they needed to know to catch a killer? So you and Sherry were living here in Southern California together?
Yes.
How was that?
It was fun. Actually, we also gained Teresa, so all 3 of us were in a mobile home together at Loma Linda.
Oh, wow. The 3 daughters? That must have made your dad so happy.
Yeah.
I've kept a lot of Sherry's clothes.
Now it's all back in style, right?
The 1980s are all coming back.
I remember her telling me that she had met John.
What was your impression of him once you met him?
He was very likable. They made a really a cute couple. They were both tall, thin, athletic, both driven with their careers.
It was a whirlwind romance, and within a year, the 2 were married. And did she seem like she had it all?
Yes. She had a new job that she enjoyed, just got married. She was a new aunt. We were really looking forward to the future.
Family was just so important to her, and you can really see that in the photos and just how happy everyone was together.
Sherry really loved Christmas.
Here's Aunt Sherry.
It was one of her favorite holidays.
Here's John holding his baby niece, Rachel.
Everybody here thinks there's going to be a baby Rutten pretty soon. I think they better talk to Sherry.
This would be Sherry's last Christmas.
Sherry's now showing why she's a leader of nurses.
Just 2 months later, Sherry and John's love story came to a tragic and sudden end. And in the aftermath of her murder, questions would linger.
When you're going through this process, you're pretty much helpless because you have no control. I mean, with the information you get is what they give you.
Nels Rasmussen was determined to find out what really happened to his daughter.
And so were the police, who wanted answers. On the night of the murder, Detective Lyle Mayer questioned a very emotional John Rutten on what he knew about the day Sherry was killed.
She had everything going. I mean,
Hey, so do you, buddy? Hey, John, for a couple of minutes, I need you to be tough for me, buddy.
Investigators looked at every possible direction. Of course, they looked at John.
What was the first thing you saw?
well, I saw Sherry lying on, I mean, it's right in front of me when I walked in the door. I saw her lying on the ground. I knew right away that she was dead.
He was shaken up that evening. He did his best to give an interview that helped investigators.
At one point, Detective Mayer asked Rutten Very difficult question.
You didn't harm your wife, did you, John?
No, I didn't. Good.
You didn't harm your wife. Okay, very good.
John Rutten agreed to do a polygraph examination, and the results came back inconclusive. But he had a rock-solid alibi.
He was at work that day. He'd left work, he had stopped and picked up his dry cleaning, and then came back between 6 and 7 p.m. and found his wife murdered in the living room area of the house.
Detective Mayer believed the murder had happened in the early morning hours after Rutten had already left for work.
When I left, she was in bed, but she was awake.
What time did you leave for work?
7:20 is when I left.
What time did you get to work this morning?
I got to work about 10 to 8.
In the eyes of Lyle Mayer, the lead detective, John Rutten was legitimately and seriously a grieving husband. They didn't feel he was hiding anything, and as far as they were concerned, he was not a suspect, and they told him so.
I'm usually a pretty good judge of character, but I'm fairly certain that you have absolutely nothing to do with this. Okay?
Mayer basically made a decision that night based on the evidence that he saw at the crime scene that this was a burglary gone wrong.
I believe your house was burglarized today. Once those persons, or that person, or whoever was inside, I believe they were trying to steal your stereo and probably some other items.
Why would they do anything to her? But why wouldn't they just run?
I don't know, John. I don't know. John, things happen, okay? I think Sherry came down the stairs, and I think she surprised him, and she was hurt. She was shot.
Oh, God.
And Detective Mayer was so convinced he'd solve the case, he even told John Rutten.
John, I know how you feel. I know what you're going through. But we're going to catch these persons, or this person, all right? You got to have a little faith in me. But we're very successful at what we do. Very, very successful.
At this point, detectives don't have a single witness. They have no murder weapon. They have no fingerprints. For even seasoned detectives, there's a lot of work ahead.
But there will soon be a break in the case. These are sketches that were LAPD issued.
Right.
Would another home invasion in the same neighborhood lead investigators to Sherry's killers?
They look like they're from Charlie's Angels.
I know.
So they're almost on different parts of the country, but you had almost the same haircut.
I know. I was still in the stage of shock that this could happen to my sister.
It's like being hit by a train. Just like being hit by a train. I'm sorry. I don't usually talk about that day or that time.
Less than a week after Sherry Rasmussen's murder, her loved ones said their painful goodbyes. A heartbroken John Rutten addressed family and friends.
When I saw John at the memorial, he was just ashen. He couldn't stop walking in circles and was just shaking.
And I want you to know that Sherry was the best professional in the world. She was the best wife that anybody could ever have. And she was the best sister, daughter. She wanted to make everybody happy.
You have to understand that was the love of his life. And trying to deal with that grief is devastating.
Back then, investigators wasted no time theorizing what they think happened to Sherry Rasmussen.
They looked at the crime scene. It looked like a burglary, smelled like a burglary.
Not long after Sherry's murder, investigators jump on a new lead. There's been another burglary here in this same Van Nuys neighborhood with a similar MO.
That burglary was interrupted by a woman coming home, seeing two men in her house, one of whom had a gun, and they fled. and witness sketches were produced of those suspects.
These are sketches that were LAPD issued.
Right. These composites were attached to this case. They started to utilize that sketch in this case to see if the persons that were responsible for Sherry's death were the same people that were depicted in that sketch.
Were they ever arrested? Were they ever found?
No, it might as well have been me and you.
Despite these suspects, there was literally nothing that could tie anyone directly to the murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
On the surface, it appeared to be a burglary gone wrong, but not everyone was convinced. How soon was it after the murder that your father and your mother started to think that maybe this wasn't a robbery like police were saying?
The very day we went to the Van Nuys Police Department.
That first day?
It didn't make sense that they wouldn't take anything other than the car and yet fight with her to the extent of her death.
Sherry's father, Nels, believed that there was another reason behind the murder because he says Sherry told him about a series of disturbing events in the weeks and months leading up to her death.
My father told the police about an incident of a nurse that didn't get promoted, and then she was upset with Sherry, and then so she sort of got into an argument with Sherry.
She felt that she had damage to her car, so when Sherry was murdered, that certainly came up to the forefront of my dad's mind that maybe that conflict accelerated.
According to family members, there was another woman who raised alarm bells for her, an ex-girlfriend of John Rutten.
She had come to Sherry's office after they were engaged, and I think she was sort of provocatively dressed and said to Sherry, "When this marriage fails, I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces." And Sherry said, "Don't worry, we won't be needing your services."
Just about a month before the murder, there was an even more disturbing encounter that Sherry, again, told her parents about. She was home getting ready for work and heard something downstairs and went downstairs and found John's ex-girlfriend standing in the living room, and Sherry told her to get out and not come back.
In the days leading up to the murder, Nell said Sherry confided in him that she was being followed by someone who she described as having piercing eyes.
Sherry never disclosed a name for the ex-girlfriend. It would have been nice had we had that, because we would have shared that with the detectives.
Nels claims that he told the original detectives about the alleged incidents involving an ex-girlfriend of Rutten.
One of the original detectives in this case told me personally they had never heard any of those alleged incidents, and none of them were entered into the official case record known as the murder book.
The single most important document in an LAPD homicide investigation is the murder book, and it's basically the place where any investigative work that is conducted, any step that is performed, everything needs to be committed to writing. And the reason that it's so important is that homicide is obviously a case with no statute of limitations.
Nels Rasmussen told me that he had been telling them for years about an ex-girlfriend of John's. When exactly that conversation occurred, he could not tell me, but I believe that it occurred.
But on the night of the murder, John Rutten told Detective Mayer that he didn't know anyone who might want to harm Sherry.
She's not having any problems with an ex-boyfriend or you with an ex-girlfriend?
No.
Has anybody been hitting on her, following her home, or anything like that at all?
I would say nothing out of the ordinary. I don't think there was anything out of the ordinary.
But Rutten says in the days and weeks following the murder, he did tell investigators about an ex-girlfriend, the same one Nell says he mentioned to police. Rutten says he never brought it up in his recorded interview with Detective Mayer because he never considered her a girlfriend. And it never crossed his mind that she could have been involved with Sherry's murder. 2020 reached out to Detective Mayer for a response to the allegations raised by Sherry's family and her husband, but he did not respond. 2020 also reached out to the LAPD regarding those same allegations, and they declined to comment.
I had come to the conclusion in my mind that it was never going to be solved, and it was something that I would have to deal with, the unknowing of what happened.
With 0 suspects, Sherry's homicide investigation was heading toward cold case purgatory.
But years later, with brand new technology and a fresh set of eyes, investigators take another look at the bite mark that was on Sherry's forearm.
And could that be the key that unlocks the mystery of the murder of Sherry Rasmussen?
Times like this, I just need to have tissue attached to me. It has been very difficult to continue to live without Sherry. Sherry was like the bridge to kind of pull us all together.
For Connie Rasmussen, the pain of losing her sister Sherry is felt most when she visits her grave near the family home in Tucson, Arizona.
It's like a heavy weighted blanket sitting on you because you can't move because it's still unresolved.
When Sherry was murdered, my grandfather, he was struggling with the fact that they were unable to find the murderer.
It ate at my dad. You know, as a father, you think, your job is to protect your children. And he felt he had failed that.
Sherry's father, the late Nels Rasmussen, gave this interview shortly before his own death in 2020.
It's probably difficult for people that know me that I hang on the way I do, but I'm learning every day how to deal with this. And I still don't have all the answers. I probably never will.
In 1991, Lyle Mayer, who's the lead detective on the case, retires from the LAPD. And the case is then handed off to other detectives within the Van Nuys homicide unit.
There were no active leads or items that were coming in at the time that were giving investigators new avenues to pursue.
I never thought that time was going to help solve the case, that it was going to ever get solved.
After Sherry's murder, time seemed to stand still for her family. But the decade that followed would bring a new chapter to the City of Angels.
The beating of Rodney King.
O.J. Simpson, who's a fugitive.
Freeway that collapsed.
Not guilty of the crime of murder.
Lyle and Eric Menendez found guilty.
Smalls was shot several times.
The impact of El Nino.
The Staples Center is just amazing. All beautiful and brand new.
Mr. Gore, the Democratic nominee, is in Los Angeles.
The Lakers gave LA one more thrill.
2001 was also a pivotal year for the Los Angeles Police Department, marking the launch of the LAPD's cold case unit. That year, detectives were handed over 9,000 unsolved murders spanning more than 2 decades. And Sherry Rasmussen's case was one of them.
I was a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department on the cold case squad. Her case was one of the last cases I looked at.
In 2001, Detective Cliff Shepard would oversee the Rasmussen cold case investigation. Why does a case like this go cold for so long?
Manpower, our priorities within the police department.
In fact, Shepard says Sherry's case had barely been touched for 10 years.
Up to that point, nobody else had looked at it other than Mayer and myself, really.
To get started, Shepard said, he made copies of select files from the Rasmussen murder book, creating his own Cliff's Notes. Why not just take the murder book so you have all the evidence with you?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Our problem was space. We were in a little office. It wasn't practical to take the entire murder book.
Breathing life into an old case is no easy feat, especially when you don't have all the evidence. Like a key piece of evidence relating to that bite mark found on Sherry's arm.
When I was going back over the reports, they indicate that a bite swab had been collected. And when I looked at the evidence, no evidence for a bite swab. So I checked with our property. They verified they did not have the swab booked with our evidence room. There's no record of it.
Generally speaking, how often does evidence go missing from a case file?
Extremely rarely, because there are professionals in the evidence rooms. There are professionals at the labs. They document everything.
To track down the swab, Shepard enlisted the help of Jennifer Francis, a criminalist at LAPD's Scientific Investigation Division.
And she had to make several calls, and several searches had to be made before eventually the bite mark swab was located.
Investigators are able to track down that missing bite mark evidence recovered from the murder scene. And the cold case team finds it here in a freezer at the LA County Medical Examiner's office.
The reason why it was way back in the freezer is because all those years ago it had been tested for blood type. And there it stayed all that time.
By 2001, DNA technology had come into its own, so Francis sent out the swab for analysis. But Shepard says given the LAPD's case backlog, it would take 2 full years for the results to come back. And those results would eventually turn the entire case on its head.
She informed me that I obtained a DNA profile.
The DNA profile was entered into the law enforcement database, but there was no match at the time. So it was a big jump in the case, but it wasn't quite enough.
It gave us a profile, but it didn't give us a name.
With little else to go on, this case is riding on that piece of DNA.
Once you got the DNA, did that prod you into doing any of the other investigative things like interviews?
At that time, no, I couldn't. I had a lot of cases going on, so it was as I had time. I just didn't have enough time. My biggest regret is not interviewing Rutten, the husband, not meeting with him and having a face-to-face. I knew he restarted his life and it was down in the San Diego area. But for me to just leave LA and go down to San Diego to interview him, I had other things going on. I couldn't do that at that time.
By 2005, Detective Shepard had moved on from the Rasmussen cold case investigation. 4 more years would pass before there would be another significant development in the case.
I'm not sure how much work was done between 2005 and 2009. I think it really took somebody going back and going through the murder book in close detail and thinking about this case.
For years, Sherry's cold case would remain unsolved. That is, until investigators took a closer look at the DNA from that bite mark, and it would lead them to a very unlikely suspect, one who had been hiding in plain sight.
I can't remember ever covering a case like this. Sex, lies, law enforcement, innocent victim.
Because what you could tell from the crime scene, there was an assailant, but that Sherry fought back.
Oh, she
with
did.
Incredible
Yes.
vigor and strength.
Absolutely, she did.
If I grab your arm,
Yeah.
and you want to release my hand, what's very close exacts it. So Sherry Rasmussen knows this is a life and death situation. Sherry tries to escape.
The co-counsel summarized the case as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart.
where she talked about her belief that there was a personal motive for this crime.
For a cold case that was running on empty, I mean, this should have jump-started it. Why didn't it?
It didn't give us a name.
They eliminated the first 4 suspects, but they began to zero in on suspect number 5.
And suspect number 5 just happens to be a cop.
Can you imagine that moment? After all these years, the answer is behind a badge.
It's crazy that you've been working just down the hall from the murderer you'd been looking for years.
Yes.
In the case because the bite marks will leave DNA.
But in 1986, DNA testing was just in its infancy.
Detectives don't have a single witness. They have no murder weapon.
Nobody really saw anything.
Detectives at the time characterized it as a burglary gone wrong.
And the trail went cold for 15 years.
But in 2001, the LAPD formed a new cold case unit to look into cases that would qualify for DNA testing.
Investigators had reignited that cold case on the back of DNA evidence stored here. Criminalist Jennifer Francis, who'd been instrumental in tracking down and testing the bite mark swab, had a stunning revelation. It was female DNA.
I assumed it was going to be burglars, male burglars. A female? Who is she?
Once you got the DNA, you realized it was a woman. Were you curious about the fact that a woman might have been involved?
I was curious what woman.
This could be the break that the LAPD needs.
I think there are times that we felt Sherry's case would never be solved. But with the results of the DNA, it gave us renewed hope that Sherry's killer would be brought to justice.
The DNA analysis that revealed Sherry was bitten by a woman seemed not to have any effect on the direction of the LAPD's investigation.
Because what you could tell from the crime scene is that there was an assailant, but that Sherry fought back with incredible vigor and strength.
And I thought, okay, we've got one with the gun, doesn't want to use it. The other one's, presumably the female who helps her partner out when he's starting to get beaten up.
By 2005, Detective Shepard had moved on from the Rasmussen cold case investigation. The bite mark came back to a female when it was tested for DNA back in 2005. For a cold case that was running on empty, I mean, this should have jump-started it. Why didn't it?
It didn't give us a name. It gave us a profile, but it didn't give us a name.
4 years went by with no forward momentum. But in 2009, a detective by the name of Jim Nuttall, assigned to the Van Nuys division, received the Rasmussen case file to check for updates as part of cold case standard procedure.
One of the first things that Nuttall notices is this 4-year-old DNA report by Jennifer Francis that indicates that it was a woman who attacked and killed Sherry.
And he just isn't buying the burglary story. Near the door, there were stacked stereo components, which ostensibly you'd think the burglars were going to grab on their way out.
It made him believe that the murder occurred first and that they were intentionally left there.
Nuttall and his team of detectives believe that this may have been personal. They conduct new interviews with those close to Sherry, including her parents and her husband, John Rutten.
He wanted to exclude all of the potential female sources or female individuals that were surrounding Sherry's life at the time.
The detectives make a list of 5 women in Sherry's orbit and eliminate them as suspects one by one. Sherry's mother and sister Teresa were on the list, as was her good friend Jane Goldberg.
They took my DNA. The one detective came unannounced, and he said, "I'm just coming to get a DNA swab."
The first 3 suspects on the list were able to be eliminated almost immediately. The 4th name on the list was a nursing colleague. There was an indication of tension and bad blood between them.
Investigators obtained a DNA sample from her, which didn't match that from the bite mark.
They eliminated the first 4 suspects, but they began to zero in on suspect number 5.
It's suspect number 5 that grabs the attention of detectives. Rutten told Detective Nuttall about an old friend and former romantic partner named Stephanie Lazarus.
Once number 5 was developed by Detective Nuttall, Detective Nuttall spoke to John Rutten again to learn a little bit more about his connection with Stephanie Lazarus.
We want to walk you through a timeline. It's very important. Starting, we believe we're close, but we'll have to have you kind of spell this out for us.
Rutten tells Detective Nuttall that Stephanie Lazarus is a name he's already given to detectives decades earlier.
I know that she went to go see Sherry, and I know that she was upset, that we weren't going to have the relationship. That's the reason for identifying her. So that's the reason I identified her 23 years ago, when we talked. One of my concerns is that was never, appears to be recorded.
And we know files.
I'm not trying to be inflammatory.
There's a certain level of frustration on our part.
Yeah,
More should have been documented. We're now forced 23 years later to literally almost start over again because we lack the documentation that would have been crucial in this case.
There's no official record of Rutten mentioning Lazarus at the onset of the investigation, but there's a single reference made in the case file nearly 2 years after the murder.
And it's a notation along the lines of John Rutten called Stephanie Lazarus P/O, ex-girlfriend.
And when John Rutten spoke with the cold case detectives, he confirmed the meaning behind that P/O.
I gave him the name and I said she's a police officer.
Not only was Lazarus a police officer, but she's still on active duty as a detective.
Think about this. You're the cold case unit investigating one of your own, and her office is just down the hall on the 3rd floor of police headquarters. Police like to talk, that's why they're cops. They ask questions. These cops needed to keep this quiet.
For over 2 decades, Sherry Rasmussen's murder went unsolved. Until 2009, when cold case investigators began zeroing in on Stephanie Lazarus, a 25-year veteran of the LAPD. She had been hiding in plain sight all along.
She presented herself as very smart, capable, athletic. She was a Division I athlete.
Lazarus's connection to the Rasmussen case was through Sherry's husband. Her history with John Rutten went back more than 30 years when they first met as students at UCLA.
And Stephanie made no bones about the fact that she envisioned a big romantic future with John Rutten. The problem is that John has never, in his own words, looked at her in the same way.
After Stephanie graduated from UCLA, she joined the LAPD in the early 1980s. At a time when the department was striving to bring more women onto the police force.
She seemed to excel and do well in specialized assignments, but it was always competitive.
And that competitive fire, coupled with being a stellar athlete, was a perfect entree for Lazarus to participate in the California Police Olympics.
The California Police Olympics were an athletic competition open to police officers throughout the state.
Anita Ortega was one of the other few female LAPD officers at the time and a teammate of Lazarus.
Stephanie was an outstanding athlete and a basketball player. I thought her tenacity was incredible. She never quit.
She may have been tenacious on the hardwood, but off the court, Anita got to know a softer side of her teammate.
Seemed like a very nice person, always energetic, this happy-go-lucky kind of person. Really enjoyed hanging around her. Stephanie shared with me that she met her boyfriend, John, at UCLA. Said he was a great guy. I never met him, but I thought they were going to get married.
Thing was, not only was Lazarus not dating John in the summer of 1985, he was engaged to Sherry Rasmussen.
Stephanie never mentioned Sherry to me or the fact that John was in another relationship.
But entries in Lazarus's own diary seemed to reveal her despair after learning that Rutten was getting married. Stephanie Lazarus had a 600-page diary. What was the story that it told?
There were these tidbits of information right up to the wedding, right up to the killing, where she was indicating to herself how despondent she was.
Despite her apparent inner turmoil, to outside appearances, Lazarus seemed upbeat and happy.
She had a really nice smile, bright eyes, just a real positive kind of personality about her.
Fitness trainer Brian Brazzi says he had an immediate connection with Lazarus, but then just a few weeks after meeting, Brazzi says there's an odd encounter at his apartment.
And there was a knock on my door. 2 female police officers fully uniformed at my door, Stephanie Lazarus being one of them, showing up unannounced. I had never given her my address.
Brazzi says it's an uncomfortable moment, and he doesn't invite the women into his one-room studio apartment. Stephanie had shown up for reasons unknown, he says, and just as quickly, she leaves.
I really didn't know what to say or how to react.
Brazzi says despite his discomfort over that visit, the two decided to go out on a date anyway. But when he later had to break the date, Brazzi says he saw a different side of Lazarus.
The next time I saw her, the look that she gave me was like just dark and menacing, and I just kind of stopped in my tracks.
By the spring of 1986, after Sherry Rasmussen's murder, Lazarus's career at the LAPD was thriving.
Daryl Gates and the rest of the LAPD brass loved Stephanie Lazarus because having her face out there, her exuberance, her athleticism, it got people excited. She was a walking, talking recruitment drive. She even made an appearance on the game show Family Feud, pitted against arch rivals, the LA Fire Department.
She continued on an upward trajectory, and she became a detective for the Los Angeles Police Department.
In 1992, she was assigned to the Personnel Division as a background investigator, someone interviewing and passing judgment on applicants to the LAPD.
It seems eventually Stephanie puts John Rutten behind her. She marries another police officer, and the couple adopt a beautiful young daughter.
One of her last assignments was to be assigned to the art theft detail, a very specialized division.
The art theft detail investigated anything that was of value that was stolen as art.
At the time, the unit was the only one of its kind in the country, and with its rich and famous clientele, attracted local media attention.
I was a contributing writer to the LA Weekly, and I had heard about Don Harisik, who ran the art theft detail. So he reluctantly agreed to do an interview with me.
Also in attendance, the junior member of the unit, Detective Stephanie Lazarus.
Every time I talked to Don Harisik, Stephanie Lazarus interrupted me, and she kept interjecting snide, sarcastic, and semi-humorous comments after my questions. It was extremely disruptive. I asked Detective Lazarus, what do you know about art? And her answer was, it hangs on the wall.
By 2009, the future looks bright for Stephanie Lazarus. She has a family now and is working in a prestigious unit.
She seemed like the happiest, luckiest person in LAPD.
All seems great. She has no clue that a net is closing in around her.
I don't know if you know my partner. Or hey, right.
Hi.
Sure, that's
yeah,
nice.
See you guys.
How's it going? Good. Have a seat.
It's June of 2009, and Stephanie Lazarus has unwittingly walked into her own interrogation for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. It's been 4 months since cold case detective Jim Nuttall first opened the case file and started carefully and quietly piecing together what he believed happened 23 years earlier.
When detectives zeroed in on Stephanie Lazarus, one of their own, it appeared that they really wanted to keep that close to the vest.
How important and how difficult was it to keep this under wraps and keep it secret?
The detectives took every effort to scrub her name from their investigation. Any references to her at that point were only oblique references like suspect number 5.
You know, it's difficult to track your own and know that one of your own has been accused of a crime or something illegal.
And to complicate matters, Lazarus's office is right down the hall from robbery homicide.
So the determination was made to not contact Stephanie Lazarus directly and to collect a sample of her DNA surreptitiously.
This is where the Special Investigations Section comes into play. Now, this group, SIS, their job is watching Stephanie, following her, and get evidence.
As luck would have it, she went to Costco a couple days after the surveillance had started, and she had a drink. And once she discarded that drink, the officers were able to collect her cup without her knowing it.
And when you collect the DNA from the cup, you match it against whoever the suspect number 5 is. What did they get?
They matched her DNA to the bite mark sample.
Can you imagine that moment? After all these years, and now we know the answer is behind a badge.
The DNA is a match, but cold case detectives still have to confront her face to face.
One of the detectives approaches Stephanie one day in her office, and he says something to the effect of, you know, Stephanie, we've got this suspect who seems to know about some big art heist. He's down in the lockup. We need to bring you down there.
Instead, it was just another detective. And so that was the stage that was set for that interview.
We've been assigned a case that we've been looking at.
Okay.
It's a new case.
So through the course of this police interview with Stephanie Lazarus, they are recording. She doesn't know.
Do you know John Rutten?
John Rutten?
Rutten.
Oh, yeah, I went to school with him. What's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Immediately, they start talking about the Sherry Rasmussen murder.
Do you know what the circumstances were regarding her death?
Jeez, let me think back. I don't know if it was, if it was a burglary or something.
She's using every skill she has to talk her way out of being connected to this in any way.
Connected to the crime or her old flame, John Rutten?
We dated. I can't say that he was my boyfriend. I don't know that he would consider me his girlfriend.
The detectives were able to get Stephanie Lazarus to confirm that she had gone to her hospital to speak with Sherry Rasmussen.
And yeah, I may have met her at a hospital.
But being that you were kind of used to see John, was everything okay between you guys? I mean, there was never anything uncomfortable or anything between you and her?
I don't know. I mean, it's been so many years.
You're probably a student of liars at this point in your career. Does that seem like a particularly adept liar to you?
It was gold for us because we had all of the evidence that disproved everything that she was saying.
Finally, when they say to her, we think we've got DNA from the crime scene, boom.
Because now I'm thinking I probably need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
because I know how this stuff works, okay?
She knows.
She absolutely knows. She knows at that point that she talked way too long.
And now it almost sounds like you're trying to pin something on me.
When the interview ended, you can hear her getting arrested.
Stephanie, you know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
You want to talk to us right now?
No.
All right. Okay.
This is crazy.
At this point, had you heard the name Stephanie Lazarus?
No. The only Lazarus I knew was the man raised from the dead that Jesus did. That's it.
This is the case that rose from the dead.
Yeah, it did.
On the third floor of Parker Center this morning, police detectives arrested one of their own.
Detectives assigned to the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division, Cold Case Squad, arrested Los Angeles Police Detective Stephanie Lazarus.
It's crazy that you've been working just down the hall from the murderer you'd been looking for years.
Yes.
Stephanie Lazarus didn't quite serve and protect, did she?
No.
When they said it was a police officer, I went, you're kidding. Absolutely kidding. A police officer committed this crime. I couldn't imagine that.
I was very shocked, but I also know how effective DNA testing is. And it kind of made me realize that, yeah, Stephanie must have committed the murder.
They were kind enough to come to our home and let my parents know that they had made the arrest. I mean, I cried because I was so excited, number one, that justice for my sister, but also for my dad.
I was so relieved and so happy and so sad. We had waited so long, but at last.
I'm totally in shock.
It was just a stunning turn of events. Then a whole new chapter begins.
The prosecution is armed with what appears to be rock-solid evidence. But this is L.A. after all, and strange things have been known to happen in court. So, you have to wonder, would a jury really believe a veteran detective is capable of committing a cold-blooded murder? 26 years after Sherry Rasmussen was murdered, the Stephanie Lazarus case finally comes to a courthouse here in downtown Los Angeles. A Los Angeles police detective accused of murdering her rival. That sounds more like a Hollywood blockbuster than a decades-old cold case finally going to trial. At her arraignment, Stephanie Lazarus pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder.
There was a lot of buzz in the air, folks across the country very interested in this case, and why wouldn't they be? It's sex, lies, law enforcement, an innocent victim.
I covered the trial from A to Z, had a side view at Stephanie Lazarus. She sat in that orange jumpsuit. What a dichotomy from her police blues.
Your co-counsel summarized the case as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart.
Right. It highlighted all of the strong pieces of evidence.
So the bite mark, of course, referred to the DNA evidence found on Sherry Rasmussen's left forearm. The prosecution considered this their ace in the hole.
You had 4 separate analyses done, so by far that was the most important piece of evidence.
To explain how the bite mark got there, prosecutors presented their theory of how they believe Stephanie Lazarus was able to attack and kill Sherry Rasmussen.
Stephanie Lazarus points the gun. Sherry grabs the arm.
If I grab your arm,
yeah,
and you want to release my hand, or get me to release my hand,
try to do this, or
you could grab me, or what's very close, exactly.
And the prosecution described the terrifying details about how they say Sherry attempted to escape with her life.
Stephanie Lazarus fires that gun twice, and 2 shots go out the backslider. So Sherry Rasmussen knows this is a life and death situation. Sherry tries to escape, and she goes down these stairs. She did not get out. They collected her fingernails at the front door.
Because she was literally clawing at the front door.
Trying to get out. Stephanie was able to get her to the living room floor and hit her over the head with the pottery and hit her again with the firearm in the face. At that point, Stephanie grabs this quilt and wraps the gun with this quilt. And she muffles the sound of those gunshots by putting that quilt right up to Sherry's chest and shooting 3 times.
Then there was the matter of the so-called broken heart described by the prosecution.
Sifting through her diary, there were these tidbits of information where she was having contact with John Rutten. She would see John, she would follow John, she would stalk John.
In Lazarus's journal, she wrote things such as, I saw John Rutten's car. I put a note on it and watched the car for half an hour. I did visit John Rutten, but his girlfriend was over. I really didn't feel like working. Too stressed out about John. I have a real hard time concentrating these days.
When Stephanie's journals were entered into evidence, it clearly identified to me that she really never gave up on her obsession with John.
John Rutten testified about his love for his wife and how he did not expect or know that Stephanie was capable of committing this crime.
Rutten said he never once promised anything to Stephanie. He described a friendly relationship that involved casual sex. But then he made a jaw-dropping admission, something he had told investigators back in 2009. After he got engaged, he gets a call from Stephanie. He reveals that somehow they ended up in bed and had sex.
When John was on the stand, I learned for the first time that he had relations with the defendant shortly before marrying my sister, and that was very devastating.
When it came time for the defense to present its case, Lazarus's attorney, Mark Overland, tried to cast doubt on the chain of custody on the bite mark swab, suggesting that the evidence was tainted and Lazarus may have been framed.
The envelope that the vial was stored in was found in a pretty ratty condition.
He showed it to the jury. Would you trust this? You don't know who opened that vial.
The strength of this evidence is that each piece was collected over a course of a long period of time, which would have made framing Stephanie Lazarus extremely implausible, if not impossible.
In his closing argument, defense attorney Mark Overland claimed those journal entries didn't amount to obsession, arguing John was mentioned only 5 times among almost 600 pages. After almost 3 weeks of trial, the case went to the jury. They returned with a verdict in less than 2 days.
We, the jury, in the above-entitled action, find the defendant, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, guilty of the crime of murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
It was just like a rush of relief that it's over.
Relief for my father that he finally was vindicated and he had his answers.
Stephanie Lazarus' sentencing hearing was held in March of 2012.
So People versus Stephanie Lazarus. Matter is set today for sentencing.
A statement from Nels Rasmussen was read by the prosecutor.
Sherry was a beautiful, talented, gifted person and a loving daughter. Her senseless death caused pain that will never, ever heal.
And John Rutten tried to describe the heavy burden it seems he will carry for the rest of his life.
I'm John Rutten. The fact that Sherry's death occurred because she met and married me brings me to my knees. I have resigned myself to trying to endure the daydreams about a world where Sherry is still with us, and this pointless tragedy never occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Rudden.
The judge is about to announce Stephanie Lazarus' sentence for first-degree murder and use of a gun.
Court will now pronounce sentence.
But this case is far from over. Sherry Rasmussen's friends and family have no idea about the shocking turn of events that await them in the not-too-distant future. Will a killer walk free? It's March 2012, and Stephanie Lazarus has just been found guilty for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
Never admitting guilt, Lazarus waved goodbye and smiled to her family as she left the courtroom.
What was her sentence?
She received 25 to life first-degree murder and 2 years for the use of a gun.
There had never been an arrest of an active LAPD detective for murder under circumstances this salacious, a cold case. And once the Rasmussens stepped forward, allegations of a cover-up.
LAPD should want to know why it took so long, and there should be accountability for that passage of time.
The Rasmussens took action in 2 ways. One was to file a complaint directly with the LAPD, alleging a cover-up to protect Officer Lazarus from criminal prosecution. They also filed a civil lawsuit against the LAPD, making the same allegation.
The day that Stephanie Lazarus was arraigned, the Rasmussens asked to get answers as to what happened in 1986 and what happened that nothing was done despite our repeated requests.
The LAPD denied the Rasmussens' allegations, citing immunity, and the lawsuit was eventually dismissed because of the statute of limitations. As for the complaint the Rasmussens filed directly with the LAPD's Internal Affairs Department launched an investigation in response to the allegations. Journalist Matthew McGough obtained a copy of the Internal Affairs file, which wasn't released publicly.
A total of 6.8 hours were devoted to trying to determine whether or not Stephanie Lazarus was protected in an internal cover-up. More than a year passed before it was closed with no one being interviewed, no investigative conclusions.
The Rasmussen complaint was classified as unfounded because the judge had dismissed the LAPD from any liability. 2020 reached out to the LAPD with questions about the handling of this case, and they declined to comment. While the Rasmussen family continued to raise questions about why Lazarus was not arrested for so long, they were certain that she'd spent at least decades behind bars. But just last November, there was a development that took everyone by surprise.
It was late 2023 when Stephanie had her first appearance before the California Parole Board. This was years before anybody thought she'd be eligible for early release.
It turns out, in the years since Lazarus's conviction, the state of California passed a new law giving special consideration towards paroling so-called youthful offenders who had committed their crimes when they were under the age of 26. Lazarus was 25 when she murdered Sherry Rasmussen. Letters supporting Lazarus's release were submitted to the parole board by friends, family, and fellow prisoners.
She took responsibility for committing the murder for the first time, something that she had denied throughout her trial and throughout her incarceration until all of her appeals were exhausted.
She showed absolutely no remorse and brushed it off as if my Aunt Sherry did not fight her, then she wouldn't have fight back, that she wouldn't have killed her.
The only reason she confessed is because she wants to get out on parole.
And at the conclusion of that parole hearing, Lazarus, to the outrage of many, was granted parole. What was your reaction to her being granted this parole?
It was a miscarriage of justice.
However, before that decision became final, California Governor Gavin Newsom intervened in the case and requested it go to the full parole board for reconsideration. Have you made it your mission to try to keep Stephanie Lazarus behind bars?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to do everything in my power.
In a follow-up hearing with the full parole board, Sherry's supporters came out in force to argue against Lazarus's release.
Moderator, we will now take speakers in opposition to Stephanie Lazarus.
She deceived and lied to everyone for almost 40 years. How can this board believe that she has changed?
Before he died, Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, recorded a video message to be played in the event that Stephanie Lazarus ever came up for parole.
If one looks at the damage that she did to my daughter's face, it's almost like she wanted to destroy the beauty that Sherry exuded.
The board's earlier decision to approve parole was put on hold pending yet another review.
I say expect the worst and prepare for our next step when that happens.
And what's that next step?
Just keep fighting.
For the family and everyone else concerned, the day has arrived where we'll find out if Stephanie Lazarus is released or remains behind bars.
My dad had a boat down in San Diego. We enjoyed the ocean and the beaches.
Was part of your father lost when the killer wasn't found?
I think I would say yes. I mean, she was just glued to my dad. We have lots of pictures of them just arm in arm.
And he never stopped fighting for her?
Nope, never.
And that struggle to keep Sherry's killer behind bars came to a head just this week as parole officials met for the third time to determine Stephanie Lazarus's fate.
I served as the pool reporter for the parole rescission hearing held for Stephanie Lazarus. After Lazarus, her attorney, and all the victim's family and representatives had spoken, the commissioners announced that they would adjourn to deliberate, and after about 25 minutes or so, announced their decision.
Stephanie Lazarus will not be released from prison, at least for now. A panel decided to rescind her parole.
The parole board's decision in the hearing was unanimous. Lazarus did not speak about the crime itself or express any remorse to the family members of Sherry who were there.
She was denied parole. It's most likely that she would appeal it and ask for another parole hearing every year. So the victim's family will go through this every year.
And as long as Stephanie Lazarus tries to win her freedom, Teresa, Connie, and their children say they'll continue the fight to keep her behind bars.
Teresa and I have continued to battle on behalf of our sister, Sherry.
We really have to keep her in because she has no regard for what she did. She does not have remorse.
I remember promising my grandparents that we would always continue the fight.
We're fortunate enough to have 3 children, all girls. Sherry was the middle one. But in many respects, Sherry was the one that held not only her sisters together, but her mom and dad.
My Aunt Sherry no longer being with our family has left a hole that can never be filled. The memories we could have had.
How would you like Sherry to be remembered?
She was a very kind-hearted person. She was funny.
She was just a wonderful, wonderful person who touched everybody she came in contact with.
I think about her every day. I mean, I have this picture in my house. I wake up, I see her.
I don't think Sherry is ever gone. She's always here.
Sherry Rasmussen's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Stephanie Lazarus in 2016 and won a judgment of $10 million.
It'll be 4 months before Stephanie Lazarus is eligible for a new parole hearing. That is our program for tonight. I'm David Muir. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
A loving husband and father with so much to live for.
He did everything for his family. He was an amazing daddy. He loved life. He loved to be happy.
Is ruthlessly gunned down at home in front of his wife.
When he was laying there on the floor, nothing can prepare you for that.
They stood over the victim's body with a shotgun and delivered a fatal blow.
This wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination.
Police tracked down several suspects.
She was absolutely the possible person who was involved. She had all the motive.
He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence.
And we knew that he and the victim had some bad blood between them.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer,
we were pretty frustrated, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
She sang like a songbird.
He had been in possession of the guns used.
And law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
To reveal a killer no one imagined.
This is unbelievable.
It was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
The darkest, blackest.
Panama City lies on the Gulf Coast of Florida's Panhandle.
Our biggest industry is tourism, with millions of people coming to enjoy the Gulf Coast.
The community is very tight. You know most of your neighbors, you know everybody that you do business with on a personal name basis.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, the town's sense of safety is rocked by a chilling 911 call.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from a woman that her husband had been shot and killed.
There was a lot of shots. I ran back to the bedroom. The killer wasn't in the house. He was coming after us. I literally thought everybody was gonna die, and I was so scared.
Police raced to the home, expecting to encounter an active shooter.
Their first thought is clearing that house, making sure that the killer's not still in the house.
As the officer entered, the first thing that he noticed was the victim's body in the kitchen area.
When they started calling out that they were the police and they were there, the wife was in a bedroom.
She had retreated to seek safety for her and her children, which were still in the house.
This is all just happening so quickly. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust that whoever's out there is not the killer.
Officers find no sign of the gunman and assure Angelica it's safe to come out of the bedroom.
The wife came out and she was very, very hysterical.
When they walked me back out, when he was laying there on the floor, I knew he was gone. You have somebody murdering your husband and shooting you, all in seconds. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Angelica identifies the man as her husband, 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
The children were taken to Ron's parents' house. They didn't live too far away. And the victim's wife went to the police department where we could talk to her.
With Angelica and the children out of harm's way, detectives can examine the crime scene.
As a responding detective, I go in and start looking around. Ron, the victim, he had been shot 3 times in the back, once in the hip, and there was a shot to the back of the head.
Investigators find an important clue close to the victim's body.
There were some bloody footprints. They're on the floor. Part of those footprints had what looked like the letter H, two H's kind of next to each other on the sole.
Whoever was wearing that shoe had perpetrated at least part of the crime because they would have been standing in the victim's blood and then exiting the residence following the homicide.
The Stovall's front door also reveals how the murder unfolded.
We could see her husband was shot outside, and then the killer shot through the door, and he got into the house, and he had shot Ron in the back of the head.
As daylight breaks, a forensic team scours the outside of the home.
They found a handgun projectile out on the sidewalk near the driveway.
The killer shot what it clearly looks like a handgun round to the lower extremities, and then you have a shotgun round to the head. This was overkill. They stood over the body and delivered a fatal blow. When you see that type of crime scene, you're looking immediately for someone that displayed some type of grudge or emotional hatred for the victim.
While forensics wrap up their investigation at the crime scene, detectives head to the police station to speak with Ron's wife, Angelica.
We really took note how emotionally overtaken she was, but she had been an eyewitness to this scene, so she was critical in our investigation.
I can't even comprehend what's going on. He was dead. I did not want to live without him. Ron was truly amazing. He was always full of life, very kind, sincere, very real.
Born in Panama City, Ron Stovall was one of 4 siblings.
He was very close with his family. He was always out doing stuff with school, doing stuff with the church.
He was well known within the community.
Ron served almost 4 years in the Navy. He had felt a commitment to his country and enjoyed his naval service.
Ron always dreamt of having a family, and in 1989, he met his first wife, Tina Trexler.
Tina and Ron got married, and they had one child, they had a daughter.
The marriage was a rocky one, and after 6 years, it fell apart. Soon after, Ron met single mom Angelica at a local beach bar.
He said he knew from the second he saw me that he loved me. Our first night, we went on a date, took me to the beach, to the ocean, put out a blanket, listened to some Marvin Gaye, had Italian food. It was very romantic. He stole my heart, and I was never in love before. I just fell right into his arms.
In 1997, the couple married. Just like Ron, Angelica had a child from a previous relationship. A year later, their family of 4 became 5 when they had a daughter of their own.
Ron took on several jobs. He worked as a waiter. He worked as a delivery man for the UPS companies.
He was very dedicated, and he just got his massage therapy license. He did everything for his family. We were very happy.
Who would want to gun down this loving husband and father in cold blood? At the station, Angelica tells police how the murder unfolded.
I was able to tell the cops everything I knew, and I didn't try to hold anything back. Ron got up at about 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up and make his lunch for him to take to work.
She explains how Ron left the house and was suddenly ambushed.
There were some shots. I didn't know what was going on. He collapsed on the ground, and the killer tried coming through the door, so I was fighting with him. He got his hand through. I grabbed the gun, and he opened the door with his hand, and I looked down that barrel of that silver gun, and he shot it.
The bullet just misses Angelica.
I ran back to the bedroom.
As Angelica shares more details about the deadly attack, detectives gain important information about the killer.
She described him as male, brown eyes, brown hair, and that he had some type of facial hair, possibly a mustache. She indicated hearing the assailant say to Ron as he was delivering the fatal gunshot wound, "This is for her."
It sounded very evil.
Angelica tells police she doesn't know the meaning behind the killer's words.
We need to find out who her was, and we needed to find out what made this so personal to her.
Well, this wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination, is what it was.
Investigators ask Angelica who might want Ron dead.
Immediately, she went to Tina, his ex-wife. Ms. Stovall indicated that the relationship between Ron and his ex-wife was volatile. There was a custody issue over their daughter.
Things got a little bit more sticky with the custody setup, and Ron was filing for full custody of the child.
Could the bitter custody battle have turned deadly?
This was an enormous red flag for us as a team. Whoever her was may have in fact had to do with his ex-wife.
It's probably one of the worst situations we ever deal with, is with the man and woman and children involved. It will just about make a person do anything.
Coming up, police uncover a key piece of evidence.
He brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene,
leading to a disturbing plot.
The photo identification that made him a prime suspect.
It was his eyes. What I saw was the same person.
And a sickening betrayal no one saw coming.
They planned this whole thing.
None of us had ever worked a case like this.
I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred.
Are looking into his relationship with his ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
We knew that there was an extreme amount of tension between Ron and his ex-wife, and there was a custody battle that was forthcoming.
Ron and Tina originally shared custody, but Ron had filed a petition basically saying that he wanted full custody of the child.
Up to this point, Tina was that individual that had the most to gain from Ron's death. Perhaps she had not been the one on scene, but it still doesn't eliminate her as having some type of involvement.
This looked like certainly an intentional and a premeditated killing. Might have been a killing for hire.
Detectives speak to Ron's friends and family to get a clearer picture of the animosity with Tina.
When Ron remarried, it was okay, but not really okay. Tina, as well as her family, did not like the new wife, and the situation deteriorated between all of them.
As Ron and Angelica's family grew, Tina's behavior appeared increasingly erratic.
Tina began feeling that Ron was trying to work Tina out of the picture as the mother, and so that had really kind of amplified the rub and the tension.
There wasn't all this, crazy fighting, and it was too hard for his daughter. We were just concerned.
This custody hearing was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks from when this incident happened.
Tina was absolutely a possible person who was involved in this murder. She had all the motive.
Could the custody battle have driven Ron's ex-wife to murder? Investigators bring Tina in for an interview.
One of the things that was most alarming when we sat down with Tina was that there was no remorse, no emotional activity on her part, that she was even concerned that he was dead.
When investigators ask about her relationship with Ron, Tina's answer is surprising.
We knew there were a lot of hostilities, but when Tina was interviewed, she kind of painted that the relationship with them was cordial, it was friendly. It's a red flag for us as investigators because she's already showing signs of deceit.
With suspicions raised, detectives grilled Tina about her whereabouts in the hours leading up to Ron's murder.
She told us the night before the homicide, she had went to work at a local restaurant. She was a bartender. She got off sometime between 11 and midnight. She had went home and sat and watched TV with her mother. Then after that she had went to bed, and at the time of the homicide itself, she had been home asleep.
Before police can press Tina further, the interview is interrupted.
Her mother had hired a lawyer for her.
The attorney made contact with Tina and immediately ended the interview.
Unable to finish questioning Tina, detectives look into her alibi.
Police were able to establish that she had been at work that night till 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Investigators also speak with Tina's mother, Ann Trexler.
She was the grandmotherly type and was helping Tina get back on her feet and help her get through this divorce.
And come across as a very down-to-earth, nice lady, a housewife, and she confirmed that Tina had been at the house with her watching TV.
Though Tina's alibi checks out, police still theorize that she could have hired someone to kill her ex-husband.
We conducted a preliminary investigation into her financial records. Everything was consistent with that of just a working-class individual making normal purchases.
1 week into the investigation with no concrete evidence pointing at Tina, police look for other suspects. They quickly discover Tina wasn't the only one in a dispute with Ron.
Tina had a boyfriend. His name was Adrian Harris, and there had been some confrontations between Ron and Mr. Harris regarding the way Ron was treating Tina. And in fact, at one point, there had been some threats made on Harris's part.
Had Adrian decided to confront Ron, leading to deadly consequences.
As we began looking into Mr. Harris, whether he was paid to do it or whether he did it on his own, we weren't sure, but the concern was that he may have perpetrated this to make good with Tina for the purpose of helping her.
Investigators tracked down Adrian over 900 miles away near Baltimore.
When we talked with Adrian, he did acknowledge that there was some bad blood between the two of them, but he really kind of downplayed the significance.
The day of the murder, he told us he went to work.
He had clocked in before 7:30, and the time of Ron's death was 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives checked travel times between Baltimore and Panama City.
There was not enough time to get to Panama City from several states away to do the murder and go back home.
While Adrian is ruled out, someone close by catches the investigators' attention.
We talked to his roommate, Guy McInville.
When the officers went to talk to Adrian's roommate, they discovered the description of the killer that Angelica gave to law enforcement. The roommate fitted quite well.
Guy McInville had brown eyes, brown hair, and he had a mustache. Now we had another individual that we want to look at.
Once we saw him, Guy fit the description. He was a roommate with Adrian Harris, and we knew that Harris and the victim had some bad blood between them. We thought maybe he went there to kill him.
Is this the break police have been hoping for? Investigators rush to confirm if Guy is a true match for the gunman.
We got pictures of him to show the victim's wife, Angelica. See if he could have been the one that she saw that night.
Back in Panama City, detectives include the picture of Guy into a photo lineup.
Angelica was an essential witness.
She was a witness who can identify the individual that did the crime. Her photographic identification, it was surprising.
His wife, Angelica. Now, detectives hope she can identify the shooter from a photo lineup.
She picked out Guy McInville as being the killer.
It was his eyes. There was something very, very similar. What I saw was the same person.
There was an identification of Guy McInville that made him a prime suspect.
We have Ms. Stovall's positive identification of Guy as the individual that was in front of their house. There's a sense of relief that begins to sweep through the unit because you're finally on to a really developing hot lead. We want to now try to establish what type of physical evidence do we actually have between the victim, Ron, and Guy.
Detectives get a search warrant and race over to Guy's Baltimore residence. They make a telling discovery.
We search his items, and looking at me right square in the face was a pair of shoes consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. So we're moving in the right direction.
Police bring Guy to the local police station for questioning.
Although we still were missing the key pieces of evidence, the guns and such as that, we really felt like we're starting to put together the edges of the puzzle. In speaking with Guy, what he provided us for an alibi was that he was in Maryland working. At the end of work, he went home, slept. The next day he got up, went to work, and so that was his alibi.
Detectives check out Guy's story.
We had had an opportunity to speak with Guy at his place of employment, and we were able to collect some video that correlated with his timeline of what he said. There was physically no way possible for him to have been here in Panama City at the time of the crime.
It turned out that what Guy McInville said to the police was correct. Guy had an alibi.
Eager to further prove his innocence, Guy volunteers to take a polygraph.
He successfully passed that. So we were able to clear Mr. McInville.
For police, it's a disappointing setback.
We were pretty frustrated, and it's a roller coaster. It's one of those, now you're back in the lows again, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
Angelica wanted to help the officers along, but her perception at the time of the event was clouded by the terror, the trauma of the incident itself.
I remember him being the same person. It stuck in my head like that, but I was wrong.
It's difficult when you see something that quick that you can say, okay, this is the individual that did the crime.
We thought we had this thing solved, but you just got to go regroup, see what you still have to do, and you just start from there.
Desperate for new leads, investigators review Ron's autopsy report.
The autopsy confirmed 2 different weapons. They told us that it was a .357 round that he had been shot with, plus the shotgun shell. One big thing we learned was that shotgun residue got in his face. We think that Ron was laying there on the floor, and this guy's saying this is for her, and he presses that shotgun to the back of his head, and Ron's looking at him when that went off.
The forensics report contains another crucial detail that could lead police to the killer.
These were close proximity rounds, and so we knew that this was something personal. And the shotgun shell was paramount. It was a unique round. We would be able to identify it. So that was a plus in our corner.
Detectives shared details of the firearms with local law enforcement, hoping to track down their owner.
We work so closely with the different police departments in the area. We talk to them all the time in case something turns up.
As investigators continue to search for answers, Ron's loved ones struggle with their grief.
The best thing in my life was that life. I didn't think I was strong enough to go through anything without him. He was always full of life. Losing your soulmate, you can't even explain how much pain that was. It still is. It'll never go away.
3 weeks after Ron's murder, the investigation is threatening to grow cold, but then police receive a tip that reignites the case.
We got a call from the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had a home invasion out there on the beach. During that arrest, they recovered 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun.
They knew from the investigation of the crime scene where Ron Stovall was killed that a shotgun had been used and that a handgun had been used.
That coincides with what we're looking for. We wanted to go over the evidence they had and the circumstances.
Could these be the weapons connected to Ron's murder?
The gentleman that they arrested, we started looking into him and looking at his background and everything. And he had a pretty lengthy criminal history, had actually been linked to some murders in the past. He really caught our attention. This turned out to be a big break.
Police in Panama City are investigating the cold-blooded homicide of husband and father Ron Stovall. They now believe the missing murder weapons were used in a home invasion robbery less than 15 miles away.
When meeting with this investigator from the Beach Police Department, what he produced from his crime scene was this: a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. That coincides with what we're looking for. Then he brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene. We have everything that meets the parameters. Now we really believe we're on the right path.
The weapons are sent off to the crime lab. While detectives await the results, they dig deeper into this new lead.
At the Beach Police Department, they identified the individual as Tony Alberto Perez. He went by Tony. He had an extensive criminal history. There was some acts of violence in his past, or some drugs in his past. They really felt like he was a pretty violent individual.
Another detail catches their attention.
Tony had brown eyes, brown hair, and facial hair. He looks just like our guy. He met Miss Stovall's physical description to a T.
Investigators head to the nearby jail where Tony is being held for the home invasion.
He come across as a kind of a likable guy. He was laughing and cutting up, but the more he talked, more red flags went up. He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence. He was completely nonchalant about it.
Detectives turn up the heat and ask Tony if he killed Ron Stovall.
Tony totally denied any involvement, any knowledge of Ron, any knowledge of anything that may have happened on that date, and basically told law enforcement, it's not me, I'm not the person.
Despite Tony's denials, investigators believe he's withholding information, and they obtain a search warrant.
Tony Perez had items that he owned stored at the landlord's house, and we're searching through Tony Perez's items over there. And then we find a pair of work boot type shoes.
While inspecting the footwear, detectives notice a key detail.
Those work boots had what looked like the letter H, two H's kind of next to each other on the sole. It looked like what we had found at the crime scene. And we got those sent right off to the lab.
As police hunt for more incriminating evidence against Tony, the ballistic results come back.
And we actually got confirmation from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that the guns collected that Tony had been in possession of matched perfectly ballistically to the rounds that we had recovered from our scene.
That evidence right there is one of the biggest things you could have in any murder case. You can find the weapons and find a person who has the weapons. That's major.
So now that we can put Tony, at least the guns, at the scene, that gave us the ability to change gears with Tony. We had the information and ammunition that we needed to confront Tony about what really happened.
Detectives head back to the jail to interview their prime suspect.
As Tony began to kind of spin his version of what happened to Ron, now he acknowledged having a little knowledge of it, but he said that he had loaned his guns to someone else and that he didn't know what they did with them. He didn't have any involvement in it. But what he says is that he had heard Ron was dealing drugs, and that's why he was killed.
We had already done a thorough background on Ron. We knew Ron was not involved in any drug business. We had talked to too many people. He was a happily married man trying to make it in life. That's what Ron was.
Then Tony gave us information that would kind of put us on some individuals that might be involved, and we tracked those individuals down, and we were able to confirm 100% that they had nothing to do with Ron's death.
People sometimes, when they are being questioned, especially when the police have some of the goods on them, will make up stories, and that's what Perez did. As far as the police could determine, that was a total concoction by Tony Perez.
Detectives believe Tony is lying, but wonder what motive he could have to kill Ron.
We were still kind of struggling to establish how Tony would have came into Ron's life.
Going through Tony's belongings, we found some cell phone bills there, and they were linked the name of Kim Miller. Kim Miller turned out to be Tony's girlfriend. So we went to talk to Kim.
Kim Miller is the owner of a Panama City hair salon.
Tony and Kimberly, they had been in a romantic relationship for several months.
We were told by Kim that Tony, he was doing odd things for her. He would come around the hair salon and he would actually shampoo customers' hair, clean up, sweep up the shop, things like that.
Investigators look for a connection between Tony and Ron Stovall.
Kim was familiar with the Stovall homicide. She claims that she first heard about it because she had a customer that had called in and canceled her hair appointment saying how her ex-son-in-law had been murdered.
When detectives ask Kim for the customer's name, they receive a startling response.
The connection kind of came out of nowhere and almost as a surprise.
Kim's client is Ann Trexler, who happens to be Tina's mother. Tina, Ron's ex-wife.
Shot and killed by criminal Tony Perez. They're now exploring a potential link between Tony and Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
When Kim Miller indicated that she styled Tina's mother, Ann Trexler's hair, and law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
Ann Trexler is the mother of Ron's ex-wife, Tina.
We knew of the ongoing hostilities between Ron and Tina. So when we talked with Kim Miller, we asked her if she had ever met Tina, his ex-wife, and she did met her on a couple of occasions. Tina's mother, Ann, however, was a regular client, was in there on a regular basis.
With Tina previously eliminated from the investigation, detectives asked Kim more about Tina's mother, 52-year-old Ann Trexler.
She told us that Ann's talking to her and telling her about these problems with her daughter going through this custody battle with her ex-husband. And she was upset about it. She's afraid she's going to lose her grandchild.
Ann had told Kimberly the Trexlers had to get a second mortgage on their home to provide legal assistance to Tina.
Could the custody battle be the motive behind Ron's murder?
At that point, we were trying to determine exactly who she was. She hadn't really been on our radar at all. We knew that she was Tina's mom. We knew that she was Tina's alibi at the time of this crime.
Ann Trexler, no criminal history, supposedly a wonderful grandmother and fine Christian lady who would never be involved in something like this.
Investigators contact Ron's wife, Angelica, and learn his custody dispute with Tina brought out a different side to his former mother-in-law.
Apparently they had a good relationship when Tina and them were married, but it was just a constant battle over visitation rights. Always just such a fight with her.
Looking to see if Ann could have anything to do with Ron's murder, detectives bring her in for an interview.
When we talked to her, she stated to us that there was no way that she had anything to do with killing. She did not want him dead. Matter of fact, she said she loved him. And then Ann Trexler wanted a lawyer. And once they get a lawyer, you're done talking.
So we're kind of getting a heightened sense of concern as far as her involvement in the case because she decided to basically not cooperate with the investigation.
Having hit a wall with Ann, detectives get a breakthrough when forensics results arrive.
We got confirmation that Tony's boot was consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. Also, Tony had been in possession of the guns used. Now you've got a personal item putting him at the crime scene. At that point, we knew we had our shooter.
That's a big piece of evidence right there.
We were able to go back to Tony and present him with what we knew.
He admitted killing Ron. His very words were, "Okay, I did it." It's the shortest confession to a murder I've ever taken in my career.
Investigators push Tony to reveal how the crime unfolded, and what he tells them is shocking.
Tony told us that Ann Trexler wanted to have her ex-son-in-law killed and was willing to pay to have it done. When we found out Ann Trexler wanted to hire somebody to kill Ron, I mean, this is unbelievable. Ex-mother-in-law gonna get involved and have pay somebody to kill her ex-son-in-law?
He had met Ann at the hair salon. She was complaining about Ron and that the two of them had worked out a deal for Tony to kill Ron in exchange for about $10,000 to be paid to Tony.
On November 10, 1998, Tony is charged with the first-degree murder of Ron Stovall. But the case is far from over. Detectives turn their attention back to alleged mastermind Ann Trexler. Searching for answers, detectives pull Ann's phone records.
The phone records were a treasure trove of information. They showed a lot of phone traffic between Kim Miller and Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler.
It clearly looks like Kimberly was the middle person between Ann and Tony.
There were phone calls between the Trexler house and Kim Miller at strange hours of the night for strange amounts of time that could not be explained away by saying, we're setting up our rinse and set. Another thing, we were able to show that Ann Trexler received a phone call from Kim Miller the morning right after Ron's death. So there were links to tie Ann Trexler to this plot, but there was no hard, concrete connection of evidentiary value. We needed something else that would show that Ann, in fact, had hired Antonio Perez to kill Ron Stovall.
Tony Perez, he says that he had come to an agreement with Ann Trexler to kill Ron for $10,000.
Detectives scour Ann's financial records for any signs she had commissioned Ron's murder.
We have withdrawals from her bank accounts that coincide with when Tony says he was paid and the amount that he was paid. So now we have proof that what Tony's telling us is accurate regarding being paid. With regards to Ann, none of us had ever worked a case like this. So it was kind of a shock that all of these pieces were kind of lining up to support she is the motivation to this entire crime.
But we felt like we still could not make the case against Ann Trexler. We needed someone to corroborate what Tony Perez said. We needed somebody else that can draw the line between the money and the murder of Ron Stovall.
We have to go back to the middleman in the case, which is Kim Miller.
She's the whole key to this thing.
She was looking at criminal charges, but without her, we're not going to get Ann. She is the only way that we're going to have true accounts of what happened.
We went and picked up Kim Miller and brought her in.
Kim Miller, she stonewalled. She said, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm not telling you anything.
Investigators working the Ron Stovall homicide have charged shooter Tony Perez with murder and believe the mastermind is Ron's former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler. But to build an ironclad case, they need Tony's girlfriend and go-between, Kim Miller, to share what she knows. However, Kim is refusing to talk.
It really wasn't until we actually laid out in front of her the phone records and drew the lines between Ann and her and Tony that we were able to convince her to cooperate with the investigation.
We let her know, she was going to be charged with accessory to the murder, and she's facing life in prison.
Prosecutors offer Kim a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Ann Trexler. Eventually, Kim takes the deal.
Kim sang like a songbird.
Kimberly was very adamant that there was a deep-seated hatred for Ron on Ann Trexler's part.
She indicated that on many occasions, Van Trexler ranted and raved about Ron Stovall, how bad he was, that he was going to remove her granddaughter. She wished that somebody would take him out, and it got more and more. Finally, Kim said, okay, if you're really serious, I know somebody who might help you.
Kim lets her know that her boyfriend, Tony Perez, will get rid of him for $10,000. That's how the deal came about.
Kim then reveals how in the early hours of October 6th, Tony drove to the Stovall house to lie in wait for Ron.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, when Ron went out to his vehicle, Tony took a shot at him with a pistol. And Ron ran inside and slammed the door behind him, and Tony Perez fired more shots, which struck Ron in the back.
To finish Ron off, Tony tried to force his way inside the house.
Angelica, she tried to hold the door, and Tony Perez fired a shot that almost struck her. She ran to the other room to call 911.
Tony Perez came in, and he found Ron on the floor and walked up with a shotgun, said, this is for her. Boom. He killed Ron Stovall right there.
When he made the statement, this is for her, it's our belief that Tony was doing this on Ann's behalf.
Tony came there to do one thing, and that was to kill Ron Stovall.
Once he had made his getaway, he was able to reach out to Kimberly and make notice to her that, in fact, the job had been done. And then, of course, she notified Ann.
Kim swears Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler, wasn't involved in their murderous plan.
Law enforcement looked at Tina Trexler. Her mother, Ann, may have confided in her, but no one could get to that much evidence to put Tina in the situation of taking Ron's life.
Ann Trexler, she tried to be the grandmotherly type, but she planned this whole thing.
Ann Trexler's thought pattern was Ron Stovall is getting ready to take my only precious granddaughter away from me, and I won't have visitation, and he left my daughter, he married somebody else. He should not be able to get away with this.
From an investigator's perspective, Ann carried just as much weight as Tony. Without Ann, Tony would not have even known who Ron Stovall was.
On February 15th, 2000, Ann Trexler is formally charged with the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
And the cops called and he said, got her, she's in jail. She is morbidly evil, the darkest, blackest soul ever. And then she'll put on a face like she's just Miss Innocent. The killer, he didn't know Ron. Ann knew Ron. I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred in their body, in their mind, in their heart.
In court, shooter Tony Perez pleads guilty and is sentenced to life without parole. In February 2000, Kim Miller is sentenced to 5 years probation as part of her deal with prosecutors. Finally, in 2001, Ann's trial begins and she pleads not guilty.
Ann Trexler took the stand. She testified about not being involved. She testified about her concerns of her grandchild and the fact that she had absolutely no involvement.
On May 14th, 2001, the jury finds Ann Trexler guilty of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
There's a little piece. I'm in a little piece in this horrible thing. A little justice, I guess.
Gets a little emotional sometimes. It's not just me. You know, we're a whole team working this thing. We celebrated, I'll just say that. We celebrated this one.
The most striking thing to me is that these are all ordinary people. And it's a little bit frightening to think that people who are walking around living everyday ordinary lives would be capable of this.
The one that initiated it all was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
For Ron's family, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
I miss him and I love him so much.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney.
I was gobsmacked that something could happen like this, literally on my doorstep.
This case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
When I found out, it just floored me. How? Why could that happen?
This is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with be capable of doing something like that?
A lot of people were generally scared.
This just doesn't look right.
There was no sign of forced entry, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
Hey! Open the door!
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting suspicion of murder.
7 miles south of Leicester, in the heart of the English countryside, lies the quaint village of Fleckney.
Fleckney is it's a quiet village. It's very close-knit. It's like it has its own little bubble. People are very, very close. Everybody knows everybody. Most people are related in Fleckney.
Beautiful rural settings, friendly people, local community is fantastic. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely place to live and grow up in.
It's not the sort of place where a lot of crime happens. I'd been to Fleckney a few times that had nothing to do with crime. I'd been there to judge a talent contest. I think it was called Fleckney's Got Talent.
The people who live in Fleckney are generally well-to-do. It's quite a low-crime area. There are retiring people there. There's some retirement bungalows around there. There's not a lot of throughfare. The people who are in Fleckney are generally the people who live there rather than the people who visit there.
And it was this perfect, idyllic village that 72-year-old Jane Hings chose to retire to.
Jane was an only child, and her mum and dad sadly passed away years before, which left her on her own with no immediate family around. Jane was quite a private person. She didn't like everyone to know, her business, and kept herself to herself, really. But once you got to know her, she opened up more, and it was just fun. She had quirky ways about her, but she was kind and she was caring.
Everybody in Fleckney knew Jane. She relied on people to give her a lift to the hairdressers, to the shops, things like that. She was inoffensive in every way. People didn't have bad things to say about her. And in her life beforehand, she worked hard.
Jane took pride in her appearance. She'd always, regular having her hair done every few weeks, and she'd always sort of make sure she was nicely dressed and put on a bit of makeup, so she'd still try and make the effort to look nice.
Having worked overseas as a nanny, Jane had settled into retirement, whilst also taking care of her much-loved rescue dog, Paddy.
He was spoilt rotten. Everything she did was for Paddy. You'd go in, there'd be dog treats stacked up to the ceiling. We'd lie on a bed at night and could look with her.
Whilst Jane used friends and neighbours to help walk Paddy, in the summer of 2017, an accident meant she needed a lot more care.
Goodbye. Jane had a fall and was admitted to hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks.
She'd suffered some injuries when her dog Paddy had pulled her over, and then when she came out of hospital, that's when she needed the carers and she needed help in getting around, and she couldn't go very far.
But the community came together for Jane, and she slowly got back on her feet.
She was the sort of person that people warmed to, they liked her, and they were happy to help out.
Then, just a few weeks after leaving hospital, tragedy strikes.
On the Sunday morning, Jane's carers went in as they were meant to, about 7 o'clock in the morning. Jane's front door was unlocked, which is normal. They went in. She was laid in bed. The cover was pulled up over her head and both of her arms were raised above her head. When they peeled back the duvet, which had covered her head entirely, they saw that she had died.
The carers are puzzled that Jane's body is covered completely by the duvet and call for an ambulance. Then, they notice something else unusual. Items are out of place in Jane's usually meticulous house.
And when the ambulance arrived, they could see that she'd been dead for some time. And the paramedic who was there, he looked around and could see that there'd been an untidy search. Some drawers were open, some things were knocked over.
Items were strewn across the floor, drawers were open.
Here is a lady who's died with the cover over her head, with the arms raised above the head, and it looks like there's been a burglary that's taken place.
With police at the scene, suspicions grow that this is not a natural death, and the house is immediately cordoned off. But with no obvious injuries, how Jane died is still a mystery, which means detectives begin to theorise what could have happened to the pensioner.
Is it a burglary that's gone wrong? Is it Jane who's suffered a heart attack following a burglary, or whether she has passed away and then a burglary has happened afterwards, or whether this is somebody who has murdered Jane and then burgled the bungalow afterwards?
The first step for detectives is to establish how Jane died.
I received a phone call from the duty detective inspector who said they had a death. They weren't 100% happy with it, and they would value my opinion on what was going on.
Dr. Hamilton attends the scene And as well as the unusual way Jane has been tucked into her bed, his suspicions are raised further.
And the most immediately concerning thing was that her nightdress appeared to be pulled up. And that seemed very unusual for somebody who'd simply died in their sleep. This just doesn't look right, it doesn't look normal.
As suspicions are raised that she could have been the victim of a sexual attack, Jane is taken for post-mortem. But almost immediately, everything changes.
This is HFM.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney. Her body was discovered in a bungalow on Elizabeth Road. It's thought the victim died at some point during Saturday evening or in the early hours of Sunday.
Whilst transporting Jane, a shocking piece of evidence has been found.
As we took the body, a tongue bar fell from one of the creases in the skin. Ms. Hings didn't have a tongue piercing, so we have evidence of somebody else very close to her body. That ultimately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in catching the killer.
On a quiet Sunday morning in the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, residents are waking up to disturbing news of a possible murder on their doorstep.
This is HFM.
Further tests are being carried out to try to determine what killed an elderly woman in her own home in Fleckney. It prompted police to launch a murder inquiry following the discovery of her body in the property on Elizabeth Road. There were signs of a disturbance in her bungalow, which has led officers to believe she may have been the victim of a burglary.
72-year-old Jane Hings has been found dead by her carers early on a Sunday morning. Her house has been burgled, and there's signs she has been sexually assaulted. Police are treating her death as suspicious and have cordoned off the scene.
There was police take from the tree round to the lamppost. You couldn't get to where, if you can just see that red car behind this thing, that was all blocked off as well, because that's the back of her house. It's not something we expected to ever happen in Fleckney. It's such a quiet village, a nice village. I was gobsmacked. There's something could happen like this, you know what I mean, on my doorstep, literally on my doorstep. And for people that I knew.
It's a place where you could leave your doors and windows open. Everybody knows everybody. But, you know, this sent shockwaves through the community. And I think that a lot of people would have felt generally scared.
With the village inundated with police vehicles, Jane's loved ones are also confronted with the news of her death.
I'd arranged to go over to James on the Sunday morning to take Paddy for a walk. And as usual, I was running late. And I'd had no phone call, which was really strange. And then I pulled into the close where she lived and just saw loads of police cars, police vans, forensics, and yeah, that's when I found out. So I last spoke to Jane the night before. I was supposed to go and see her that day. I'd been on holiday, so I hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks. And we were on the phone for about an hour. I miss Jane. I miss the phone calls. There was so much she could have talked about her life, and I didn't get to hear any of it. And my phone is so deadly quiet all the time.
Whilst moving Jane's body, pathologists have discovered a tongue bar in her groin.
The investigation then shifted from, is this a burglary that's gone wrong, to this is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
That tongue bar was put into an evidence bag immediately. Everyone knew that this was potentially important. That went straight off. It was fast-tracked through the DNA lab.
As detectives wait for the DNA results, Utmost on their mind is that this might not be an isolated incident.
One of our first lines of inquiry is to research cases of a similar nature, and we conducted a number of checks looking at anybody who was already convicted and in prison who could have been on day release for the same offence. But then this case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
Immediately, door-to-door inquiries begin.
When officers initially attended the scene, they tried to identify people who would know Jane the last time that she was seen or spoken to.
Officers investigate whether Jane had any enemies in the village.
When we looked at Jane's past, there was no fallouts with anybody. There was nothing to indicate somebody with a vendetta, somebody with a grudge, any past history with anybody which would tell us this person has a long-running grudge against Jane and would want ill of her.
But locals have their own suspicions.
When the police first came, they said there was no sign of forced entry or anything like that, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
And it appears that whoever stole from Jane took some of her most precious items. Her wedding ring and a necklace are missing, along with her mobile phone, handbag, and £200. But police find an item they suspect doesn't belong to her.
Behind that bed, between the headboard and the wall, was a baseball cap found on the floor.
It was a designer cap, something that didn't belong to Jane.
The question police want to know is, whose hat is it? And did its owner have anything to do with Jane's death? With the post-mortem results in, it's apparent Jane has suffered a brutal attack.
Really tellingly, she had lacerations, she had tears, both to her anus and to her vagina. The external injuries were really focused around the mouth and the nose and the upper neck area. Ms. Hings didn't have that many injuries on her body, but what there was told a story. There was a little linear graze, a scratch on her neck, and we know that her necklace was missing. It would certainly fit with somebody having pulled that necklace and it scraping across the skin. The most important thing that the post-mortem brought out in itself was that there was no natural cause for her to die. No natural cause for Miss Hings to be dead. In addition, there was some quite disturbing bruising around her jawline, around her mouth, something that really makes you think we have to be sure that this woman hasn't been strangled or smothered.
Less than 24 hours after Jane was discovered, the fast turnaround DNA profile from the tongue bar is returned from the lab.
That profile was put into the DNA database and they soon had a match, they had a hit, and that match was Craig Keogh.
26-year-old Craig Keogh's DNA was on file, as he was known to the local police as a petty criminal. Now, he was part of a major manhunt.
Craig Keogh was a local lad. He grew up in the area. He still lived in the area. Craig led a transient lifestyle. He doesn't have a car, he didn't have a phone, he didn't have a job, he didn't claim benefits. So trying to work out where he lived in the Fleckney area meant we had to do a lot of inquiries at a fast pace, but in a discreet way as well.
Police managed to trace Craig to a caravan which was on the outskirts of Fleckney, but not very far from where Jane lived.
Once we'd identified that he was living in a caravan, we sent officers there.
Someone in the caravan! Police! Open the door! Police, open the door! Someone with the dark hair in there.
And there was a slight standoff of about 30 seconds where the caravan was surrounded and Craig took some time coming to the door before he was arrested.
Right, hands behind back.
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. The rest is necessary for prompt and effective investigation. You don't have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do so may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you? Yeah.
Craig is taken into custody as detectives try to build a picture of the young man they suspect murdered Jane.
He didn't live far from Jane. He was a former factory worker. He'd been in trouble for burglary, a few break-ins and stealing from his parents and from a friend. But he wasn't known as a major criminal. He wasn't known for anything as horrific as this.
As Craig's DNA was identified on the tongue bar and in her bungalow, detectives want to know how it got there. Craig is interviewed under caution.
When was the last time you saw her then?
The last time I saw her was Sunday night.
Okay. What time would that have been?
I got there for about 10:30.
You got there at 10:30?
Yeah.
That's PM?
About 10:30 at night.
At night? Okay. So if we take from 10:30 at night then, through to when you left at 11,
Yeah.
tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again.
Just tell me exactly what she said to you about having sex.
She just said, "Craig, will you have sex with me?" And then, well, the first time it started off was about a month ago, and I was in the house, and then she just came into the front room naked, and then she was like, "Craig, come and do it with me and I'll pay you."
He offered the reason that his DNA was inside of Jane and inside the scene was because Jane had paid him for sex.
Okay, and how much did she pay you?
Yeah, she paid me £200.
£200.
In the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, police have arrested 25-year-old Craig Keogh on suspicion of the murder of Jane Hings.
Do not have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do so may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Could this local lad really be responsible for the rape and murder of a 72-year-old pensioner? The news has sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with all these years could be physically capable of doing something like that? I felt sick and it was horrible. Like, who does think something like that? To such, you know what I mean? You hear about it, but she was an old lady. She was old. He was a young lad.
Keogh has been taken into custody and is being interviewed under caution. With his DNA found on the victim and at the scene, detectives want to know how Craig knows Jane. And he has an explanation.
I was walking through the village, and I saw this lady, and her shopping bag broke, and I helped her, and then I carried it to the house with her.
Craig told us in an interview that he met Jane when he was down the shops, and that she asked him to pick up some shopping for him and offered him some money for it, and then asked him to walk her dog, Paddy, as well.
But Craig alleges that it wasn't just household chores Jane was paying him for.
And then another time, she's asked me to have sex with her for money. And it happened a month ago, the first time. And then she's asked me to come back a month later. And then it happened again.
Key to the police investigation was the tongue piercing found in Jane's groin.
Have you got any piercings?
I got my ear pierced.
Your ear pierced? Okay. Anywhere else?
Yeah, my tongue pierced.
Your tongue?
Craig goes on to admit that he'd been with Jane the night she died, saying he arrived at her house around 10:30 p.m.
Tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again, and she's like, "I'll pay you more this time." I was like, okay. I didn't think anything of it. And that was it really. And she said she felt sick, and then I left her.
Craig's detailed account that he had sex with Jane and left her very much alive turns the investigation on its head.
During the course of his interviews, he came up with an explanation as to what happened. And I have to say, it was so bizarre.
Craig also suggested that Jane, whilst alive, was unwell when he left.
What he was saying was that she'd become a little bit wobbly and a little bit unwell and had then gone back to her bed. He'd then closed the door, and obviously whatever happened afterwards was someone else. Some stranger, no doubt having seen that the door was open, would have gone in there, burgled her, and perhaps killed her. And so that might possibly have been an explanation for what happened.
The interviewing officers had to keep an open mind, but had to probe and get as much detail from him as possible to find out whether it was right or not.
Was Craig telling the truth? Was Jane alive when he left? And so was it someone else who sexually assaulted and killed her? Forensics carry out a detailed search for additional DNA or fingerprints on Jane or in the bungalow.
There was nothing else from the scene, from Jane, from the post-mortem which identified anybody else other than Craig. We'd had all of these things examined, and they only pointed at Craig Keogh and did not point to anybody else.
With no one else in the frame, Craig's movements on the night in question are investigated.
Craig had been on a night out in Oadby, a nearby town.
I think it was between 8:30 he came in that night. Remember it well because Leicester City had played Liverpool on that night, so we had a fair few in. He stood out straight away because he had his baseball cap the other way around and he was just bouncing up and down.
Staff at the pub said that he appeared agitated, aggressive, and almost as if he was up for a fight. They said he was high on drink and drugs.
Now, this was crucially important evidence because in his interviews, he said that by 10:30 that evening, he was sitting in Jane Hing's living room in Fleckney, watching a war film and having a drink with her. That was a lie. He was out with his friends. We were able by that process to show that he'd taken cocaine, that he was offering to sell other people cocaine, and that he was complaining about how boring the evening was.
As doubt is cast on Keogh's version of events, police trace his movements after he leaves the pub. He's next seen arriving back in Fleckney at just after 1 a.m.
His friends say that the last time they saw him was when the taxi dropped him off and they assumed he was going home.
But Keogh walks in the opposite direction of his caravan, heading in the direction of Jane's bungalow.
We knew from CCTV that the suspect had walked to Jane's house wearing a baseball cap, and when they were walking away they didn't have it on, and we could see that.
Detectives believe this places Keogh in Jane's bungalow around 1:15 a.m. And when he returns home, he's captured again.
We see him going back into his caravan, carrying something. Now, he goes out again, and he returns out around 2:30 in the morning for another 15 minutes or so, and we are certain that he went back to Jane Hing's house in that period of time. We don't know what he did.
The following morning, Craig is again seen on camera.
The morning after he was seen walking along the street, he was captured on CCTV with a black bin bag.
He's spotted again a few minutes later, but the bag has vanished. What did he dispose of? The police believe it was some of Jane's belongings, but a search of the area reveals nothing.
This is HFM.
It's 5 o'clock. This is HFM News. Detectives have been given more time to continue questioning a man on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a pensioner dead in her bungalow in Fleckney on Sunday morning. Officers also believe items were stolen from Miss Hings's bungalow in a black bin liner. They're appealing for villagers to check their gardens and outbuildings in case it's been discarded there. A post-mortem examination has so far failed to identify her cause of death.
With help from the public and CCTV, police are able to piece together Keogh's movements 24 hours after Jane's death. Friends described Craig as splashing his cash, buying them drinks and himself a new tongue bar.
He tried to get rid of Jane's jewellery in trying to sell it. He got rid of her handbag. He was trying to get rid of every last bit of evidence that would connect him to Jane.
He went into Leicester city centre and he actually went to a pawnbroker's. He sold her jewellery for about £100 when the items of jewellery were valued around £1,000.
With enough evidence that Keogh stole items from Jane and had raped her, detectives also believe they have a killer on their hands. But proving he murdered Jane was going to be their biggest challenge.
So far as murder was concerned, we had no cause of death. We were unable to show how she died, whether it was deliberate or accidental, forensically at that stage.
In the village of Fleckney, 25-year-old Craig Keogh has been charged with burglary, murder and the rape of pensioner Jane Hings. The news that Jane was sexually assaulted in her home has been made public.
The community were on edge already, knowing that an old lady had been murdered in her home, but then once the true nature of it came out, people were really worried.
When I found out that information, it just floored me. It played on my mind all night. You know, a woman of that age, how, why could that happen?
I'd say the villagers would be distressed because a majority of them are similar sort of age to Miss Hinks, and you know, and there's quite a few vulnerable people out there as well, and it obviously upset them, but also put a bit of fear into them as well that this could happen on their doorstep.
Within days of his arrest, Keogh is brought before a judge and the charges read.
He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, so that was murder, 2 counts of rape and burglary.
Keogh is remanded in custody and a date set for his trial. But the work of the prosecution is only just beginning.
This was horrific violence perpetrated on a very frail old lady whilst she was still alive. And there was then the added complication of trying to prove how she died.
So one of Craig Keogh's lines of defence actually referred to him knowing Jane Hings, and yeah, he said that she paid him for sex, and that was a reason that he went around and he claimed she was still alive when he left her bungalow on that night.
Experts believe that Jane has been smothered with a pillow, and proving it was Keogh is imperative to the case.
The DNA on the pillows was of saliva, and so we could show that Jane's saliva was on the pillows. That was all.
Typically with a material object, you can't get fingerprints from it. And it's really difficult. For us as investigators, we sat there believing that the pillowcases were our murder weapon. How could we prove that?
With concern that Keogh might get away on a technicality, the police and prosecution reach out to forensic specialists.
Now, our pillowcases had been sat in the bottom of an evidence bag, sat in the exhibit store for, at this point, 4 months. They weren't laid out flat like you'd see in a movie or anything like this. This is a pillowcase shoved in the bottom of an evidence bag.
But as we got nearer to trial, we discovered a new scientific development.
Leicestershire Police said to me they had a pillowcase that they were interested in trying to develop some fingerprints on. They wanted to know whether a novel process I'd been researching was appropriate for this type of exhibit. I recommended that they tried vacuum metal deposition, and I also directed them towards Gloucestershire Police, who had a vacuum metal deposition machine that they could use and a trained operator, which is probably the best technique that we're aware of that gives you a chance of getting fingerprints on fabrics.
Vacuum metal deposition involves vaporizing gold and zinc in a vacuum chamber. The metallic particles are attracted to the fabric and form a negative image of finger marks wherever it has been touched.
So what you have here is the image of the pillowcase as it's come out of the vacuum metal deposition machine. These dark regions where you have quite a lot of zinc deposition, and you have these light regions where zinc simply hasn't deposited. It shows whereabouts the pillowcase has been gripped, and it also enables you to say, well, it's been touched there, so you can then target other techniques such as DNA recovery for those techniques.
We were able, therefore, to show that the pillow had been held in a position that you wouldn't hold a pillow ordinarily in order to put it over Jane Hing's head to kill her.
So that proved our murder weapon. We had Keogh's finger marks on the short edge and Jane's saliva in the middle of the pillow.
But the question is, would it be enough to convict Keogh? The trial begins at Birmingham Crown Court, and Jane's friends come face to face with Keogh.
Craig was just deadpan through the whole entire time. Not an ounce of remorse, not any kind of emotion. He showed nothing.
When Craig sat in the dock, he was expressionless. It was difficult to really see any signs of emotion.
Obviously, Jane's friends are of her age, so are a lot older, and didn't want to go and sit through all of that. So I went and sat for her. I didn't want Craig to think that nobody cared about her. I wanted to be seen that, you know, she meant something to somebody.
Craig had denied all along that he was responsible for raping and murdering Jane Hings. In fact, his version of events was at complete odds with the prosecution's case, the police case. He had said that he had gone to see Jane to have sex. He said that they had watched a film together that night, a war film. Checks were made, and there was no war film on TV. It was a complete and utter lie.
As the trial unfolds, the defence tried to paint a picture of Jane.
Craig Keogh was describing Jane Hings as being a sexually promiscuous, drunken woman who liked nothing more than spending her pension money on having intercourse with a young man. We discovered she didn't drink alcohol. There was no alcohol in her bloodstream after her death.
So the jury were then shown all the mobility aids that Jane had in the house, the fact that she couldn't walk between rooms without needing a walking stick or a frame.
So the idea of her being interested in active sexual activity was laughable.
Central to the prosecution case is proving that the sexual contact was non-consensual.
So we instructed an expert in sexual injuries to examine her body. And as a result of that, we were able to show that the sexual activity was not consensual activity, and it would have caused her significant amounts of pain, and it happened when she was alive.
And it was for this reason they believe Keogh decided to kill Jane.
She must have cried out when that happened, and he must have wanted not to be caught and to complete the act. And we know he did complete the act because there was semen within her body. And I expect that during the course of that sexual assault upon her, he decided to kill her because she wouldn't shut up.
Establishing that Keogh had the motive and opportunity to kill Jane, the prosecution introduces what they believe is the murder weapon.
The scientists went the extra mile on this one because they could show that finger marks left by Keogh were on the short, straight edges at the side, and they were gripped like this and applied. And they then took it one step further to look for the amylase staining, that's the protein staining in the middle, to show that Jane had exhaled a lot and given out a lot of moisture from her breath, indicating that that's where she was smothered. And then when the scientists came to court to explain it, the jury was sat there like, oh wow, this is really impactful.
With the prosecution evidence built against him, Keogh remained silent.
Craig sat there very quiet. He chose not to give evidence. He chose not to be cross-examined by prosecutor, and he showed no remorse, even when the horrific details were read out of what he had done.
Craig Keogh could not offer any evidence which the jury could look at and say that he was not guilty. He couldn't offer any alibi, and he couldn't offer any plausible explanation as to why this had happened or why he was suspected of it.
After 5 days, the jury is sent to deliberate. Presented with all the evidence, they have to decide whether the marks at the edge of the pillow and all the new scientific data prove that the young man in front of them is a murderer.
There are two choices for a jury here. Either he went into that house and raped her and burgled the property and then left, and a random stranger came in and smothered her, or the person who raped her smothered her. That's the choice.
Even though you've listened to the whole trial and you know he's guilty, the evidence says he's guilty, those minutes, hours of waiting to hear them words, it's still nerve-wracking, you know, because they could come back with not guilty.
After 4 hours, the jury returns.
They came back and unanimously said that he was guilty of 2 counts of rape, murder and burglary.
When the jury came back, he was plainly shocked. Craig Keogh stood there, and when sentence was imposed, he stood there with an element of resignation, but he didn't seem at any stage to show any kind of remorse. No sadness for her, no sadness for his own family, who appeared to be very decent people. From the beginning to the end, it seemed to me he was entirely focused on himself.
Keogh was given a life sentence and will only be eligible for parole after 32 years. But for all involved, this case has taken its toll.
When I went into Jane Hing's house, I was struck by the peace and tranquility in which she'd lived her life. She was a very simple lady. Beside her bed on one side was her Bible and a crucifix. And on the other side, as she had gone to bed, no doubt like every other night, she'd left her teeth on the side of the bed. And imagining just being in your own bedroom, in the comfort of your own home, and having a young, strong man, plainly intoxicated and under the influence of drunks, coming into your room about 1:15 in the morning, waking you from your sleep, must have been terrifying. That, I think, stays with me.
This case will stick with me. It's one that the community will remember for a long time. It's one that the police officers who went to will remember for a long time.
I've covered numerous murder trials over the last 25 years. The rape of anyone is distressing, it's shocking, but this was particularly shocking because it involved the rape of an elderly woman.
I've been asked many times, what are my feelings towards Craig? And I have none, is the simple answer. I don't hate him because that's an emotion. I literally have no emotion towards him. But to think of what he did, it broke my heart to try and think about the fear that would have been going through her mind at the time. And then to be smothered with her own pillow. Jane was cremated and I put her ashes in an urn that sits on my mantelpiece so she can watch over Paddy every day until the day that he sadly joins her, in which case I will get him cremated and scatter their ashes someplace nice.
Are you gorgeous?
So they can be together again.